Good morning, everyone. Now, I would like to discuss with you about the topic on agrarian reform, and this is a part of the socio-economic development or civilization of the Philippines as a part of our history. Okay, in lesson A of chapter 4, we talk about the agrarian reform. There is an opening statement in your reading material which says that a well safeguarded landholder's right dismantles the veil of scarcity. What is the meaning of this, class? This statement can be well explained by means of stating that when a holder of right over a land, over a property, particularly a land in agrarian form, as we are talking about agrarian, which means agriculture lands, if the landholder's right is so protected and is being safeguarded very well, then that could be a way, or that would pave a way for such holder of right to uplift his life from poverty. So, meaning to say that a well-protected right to hold over a property or a land in this sense, could be a way or a method or a manner for a particular individual to uplift himself out or take himself out of poverty. Okay, now in our constitution, in the Philippine Constitution of 1987, and even the previous constitution way back in 1899 under the Malolos Constitution, there was a particular principle or doctrine that is being mentioned, though it's not apparently or blatantly mentioned in the Constitution. You could interpret it from reading the context of the law, which states that property ownership, including that of lands, must conform with the regalian doctrine. Regalian doctrine or principle that is enshrined in our fundamental law. When I talk about fundamental law, I am speaking about the Constitution itself, because it is where the obedience of inhabitants of this country should conform or should obey. Now, this regalian doctrine, class, is a very popular principle, which states that all natural wealth, that includes agricultural, forest, timber, and mineral lands of the public domain, and all other natural resources belongs to the state or belongs to the country itself. It simply means that a certain private or a certain property which has no owner belongs to the state, belongs to the country. So even if a private person owns the property where minerals are discovered, his ownership does not give him the right to extract or get those minerals without the permission of the state to which such minerals belong. Example, yung mga minero natin. That is why miners need to secure permit from the government before they could excavate a portion of the land. Why is that so? Well, because of the regalian doctrine. Meaning to say, even if that treasure is found in your land, Okay? Like for example, you are a holder of title or land title of that particular land. Okay? So nakapangalan yung land na yon or yung lupa na yon sa'yo. Okay? Does it mean that the gold, kung meron mang gold dyan sa loob or sa ilalim ng lupa na yan na nasa loob ng compound mo or ng lupa na nakatitulo sa'yo, ay pagmamay-ari mo? Well, that could be the presumption clause, but according to the regalian doctrine that we are following in our country, those minerals, okay, the treasures that can be found underneath the soil, okay, even if that soil or land to where it is found is titled under your name, okay, you still need to secure permission from the state. Why? Because it is presumed that those minerals belong to the state, that your title only covers the upper portion of the land. Okay? Well, dito sa ating sa Kalinga, I do not know if this will be followed in case a gold treasure will be found in a certain compound. Siyempre, sigurado ako paglalaban ng may-ari na sa kanya yon dahil nakita niya yung gold na yon sa sarili niyang compound or sa sarili niyang lupa. Okay? Well, he has a point, but according to regalian doctrine, you must have to secure permission. Well, the government will not say you don't have any share, okay? But the fact is, you need to share the treasure with the government, because it is under the law that anything that is found underneath the soil, okay, even if those treasures are being found or the treasures are being found under the land from which your name is being, or from which you are the named owner of that particular land from which it is excavated, still those minerals belongs to the state. Okay? So malinaw yon. Regalian doctrine meaning to say that where a specific property is not under the name of any private individual, then such property belongs to the state. Okay? That all natural wealth, that's why it says natural wealth, that includes agricultural, which is land, the forest, the timber, and mineral lands of the public domain, and all other natural resources belongs to the state. Okay? That is why meron tayong tinatawag na demolition, like for example, if you extend your building in the road right-of-way, that is why it is called as road right-of-way, because that road right-of-way belongs to the state. Okay? That is why there are demolitions undergoing in some cities, like for example in Manila City, because of the informal settlers occupying land or a property that does not belong to anybody else, hence it belongs to the state. Like for example, a mountain, okay, why is it that a mountain is considered as a property of the state? Because a mountain cannot be named after an individual unless, okay, that land is considered alienable land. Alienable means say a particular property or a land that can be disposed of. By whom? By the state. Why? Because it is the state that is presumed to own that particular land. Let's say, yung isang mountain. Yung isang mountain class or bundok, okay, is presumed to be owned by the state. Bakit ngayon merong mga nakakuha ng lupa doon at meron ng magmamay-ari sa bundok na yan? O, ito, bundok ni letter A ito. So, what happened? Sabi ni ma'am, pagmamay-ari ng state. Why is it being named under letter A? Why? Because letter A saw that that particular land is alienable land, a land owned by the state that can be this, since he is the owner or it is the owner of that particular land, then it has also the right to dispose, and that land is subject for disposal. Okay? Alienable. It can be transferred. The title can be transferred. That is why the government or the state might or may grant somebody else that particular land. Kuha ninyo? That is why we have what we call cadastral lands, which are given to people who applied for that particular land. So alienable lands can be named under a particular private individual if such individual will apply for such title before the government. Well, of course, when you apply for the title, you have requirements to show. Okay? So I will not go into that requirements because that is already a part of what we call a subject of the law school. It could be found in the obligations and contracts and property, intellectual property rights and property ownership. Okay? And civil law. And that's part of the civil law already. So I will not go into the details of the requirements. What I wanted you to have or grasp in this discussion is that the regalian doctrine speaks about the property of the state over lands or properties whose ownership or whose owner is not being identified. So anything that you can find in a Philippine island which is not owned by anybody else belongs to the state. Since it is the state that owns them, it is also the state that has the power to transfer title over them, to grant titles to anybody else who applied for it. Okay? So it has the power to possess and the power to dispose. Syempre, kung ikaw may-ari, may karapatan kang ibenta, okay, yung pagmamay-ari mo. Okay? This applies the same thing to the government itself. Well, that is inclined with the term used in the law school, which is res nullius. Okay? Res nullius is a Latin term. The res meaning things and the nullius meaning without an owner. So anything that has no owner, res nullius. Okay? Things without an owner. Okay? So these things without an owner belongs to the state. That comes now what we call the regalian doctrine. So I hope that you understood the meaning of a regalian doctrine. Now, in conformity with that regalian doctrine is what now we call as the agrarian reform. So if you talk about agrarian reform, from the term agrarian or agricultural, we talk about land. So this refers to the redistribution of lands. Well, without regard of the fruits that or crops that are being found or produced in that particular land, these lands are given to farmers which do not have or do not possess any land, and regular farm workers, irrespective of their tenures of tenancy, to include the totality of factors and support services that is designed to elevate their economic status. Okay. Meaning to say, ito yung pagdidistribute ulit ng mga lupa para sa mga tao, especially farmers, na walang lupain. Okay? So the beneficiaries are the farmers or the landless. Or the regular farm workers, ito naman yung mga matatagal ng regular na farmers who are nakikisaka or nakiki-cultivate ng land from the owner. Okay? So they are cultivating a land which they do not own, and by virtue of the time or the period they spent as a regular farm workers, then they are being benefited with the redistribution of lands, or what we call agrarian reform. Okay. Well, one of the essential elements of agrarian reform talks about the land reform, which concerns the security of tenure and the abolition of tenancy and the imposition of ceilings and etc. Okay, security of tenure meaning to say that your tenure or the term of cultivation of a particular land given to you is being secured. Ibig sabihin, hindi ka basta-basta patatalsikin o palalayasin, o hindi ka basta-basta i-dispossess from the farm or the land that you are cultivating. Like for example, si A nakikisaka sa lupain letter B. Dahil si B hindi siya nagustuhan kay letter A, aalisin niya ngayon. Meron ba siyang karapatan? Yes, because he is the owner of the land. But under the agrarian reform class, hindi niya pwedeng gawin yon even if he is the owner of that land. Okay? If letter A is a regular farm worker for a definite period longer of time. So there is a specific period that you have to count in order to consider him as a regular farm worker, okay, and to be benefited with the agrarian reform. So under the agrarian reform law, hindi siya pwedeng patalsikin ng basta-basta ng may-ari ng lupain. Okay? In this agrarian reform, actually, the tenants are given portions of land of the master or of the owner, considering or in consideration to the period from which or for which they had already rendered their service as regular farm workers to the owner. Okay? In that case, here comes now what we call the abolition of tenancy. So the letter A is a tenant of letter B because letter B is the owner of the land that letter A is cultivating. So he is called a tenant. As a tenant, okay, you have to pay some fees towards your master or the landowner. Okay? Now, under the agricultural reform, as I am saying a while ago, there are instances that in consideration of the period for which letter A or the tenant has rendered his service, okay, to the landowner, a portion of the land of the owner will be given to the tenant for free. That is under agrarian reform. Once the tenant has been given a portion of land for free under the agrarian reform law, then of course, it means that he is no longer a tenant of that particular land. Okay? So, hindi na siya ngayon cultivator lang or tagasaka lang ng lupain na naibigay na sa kanya. But there may be other lands that he might still be cultivating for the benefit of the landowner. Ang ibig lang sabihin nun, class, hindi na siya totally nakikisaka lang doon sa lupain ng iba. Meron na rin siyang sariling lupain. And that abolishes what we call tenancy. Ibig sabihin, in that particular land na naibigay sa kanya under agricultural reform, ibig sabihin, hindi na siya tinatawag nating tenant. Okay? But he may be a tenant still to the other parts of the land that he cultivates for the benefit of the landowner. Okay? Well, class, if you talk about agrarian reform, it does not only cover what we call redistribution of land, okay, but also the provision of infrastructure, services, and sometimes a whole program of redistributed and democratic reforms, which we referred as land reform. Okay? So, hindi lang yung pagbibigay ng lupain ang sakop ng agrarian reform program. Sinasakop din niya ang tinatawag nating the provision of infrastructure. Yung pagbibigay ng buildings, okay, ng services. Okay. Why? Because these services or these infrastructures are needed for the development of the land or for the benefit of the tenant. Okay? So, medyo mas malawak ang sakop ng agrarian reform comparing to what we call land reform. Because land reform is a part of agrarian reform. Now, land reform refers to a narrower redistribution of land. Well, this is usually to a limited group of beneficiaries. Unlike in agricultural or agrarian reform, under agrarian reform program, that the beneficiaries could be general. So, anybody who could apply, and anybody who is a farmer who is a landless, one who is a regular farm worker. Okay. What about in land reform? Okay. Land reform actually is an integrated set of gauge or a measurement that is designed, okay, or made to eliminate. Eliminate means eradicate, alisin, the hindrance into economic and social development that is arising out of inadequacy in the agrarian structure. Okay, so ang dami kasing kulang in the agrarian structure. Okay, so in order to augment, na ma-fill in yung mga gaps na yan or inadequacies na yan, okay, they instituted what we call the land reform program. So there are different views of what we call the agrarian reform. We have what we call the economic view and the sociocultural view. Apart from that, we also have the religious view of the agrarian reform. Well, class, under the economic view, it speaks about the position of agriculture in the national economy. Okay? So, it is safe to say that agriculture is essential component or the vital component of what we call the economic structure. Why? Because a high portion of the total working population are employed in agriculture and a significant percentage contribution to the gross domestic product comes from the agriculture. Well, in the economic condition of our country, class, you have to understand the term gross domestic product. So this is a measurement of the economy of the Philippines. When it goes up, when the gross domestic product goes up, then our economy also goes up. Okay? Or inflates. This is already the law of inflation and deflation. So, yung pera ng Pilipinas, yung funds of the Philippines will also grow once that the domestic products grew. Okay? So, pag tumaas yun, kasabay nun ang pagtaas din ng ekonomiya ng ating bansa. So, what are the factors that contributes to the inflation rate of our economy, national economy? Is one factor is that the larger one or the major factor in such economic inflation is what we call the agricultural part. Okay, so our economy relies heavily on agricultural sector. Well, because it forms the dominant industry in the Philippines. As you can see, especially in Cagayan and some parts of, particularly in some parts of Nueva Ecija, okay, so was considered as the rice granary of the Philippines. So the economy, okay, the agriculture in Cagayan Valley usually, okay, is a major factor or a major contributor, I should say, to the inflation rate of our gross domestic product. And class, in relation to agrarian reform, one of the techniques in order to encourage the farmers to increase their gross domestic product or their production is to make them the owner of their land. Well, it is very basic that if you are a farmer and you are farming or cultivating a land that is not yours, well, there are times that your profit is too low or too less to accommodate all your needs or to provide all your needs. Why? Because a greater portion of your profit goes to the landowner. Okay? So if you think of the other way around and you are the owner of the land that you are cultivating, all the profits that you gain from that land will be yours and will be enjoyed by your family. Okay? So meaning to say, if you enjoy all the fruits of your labor on that particular land, then you are encouraged to do more production. You are encouraged to cultivate more and use all the means in order for you to have a good production. Okay? So it goes in the most basic way, okay, that one of the techniques to encourage the farmers to increase their production is to make them the owner of the land that they are cultivating. This is to free them from the control of the landlords. Well, class agrarian reform was actually made or created to strengthen an economic environment that will encourage farmers to produce more and market more of what they produce. Because if the farmers will produce more, well, the gross domestic product of the Philippines itself will raise. Okay? So if the GDP or the gross domestic product of the Philippines inflates, then the economy, the national economy, will also increase. So that is the economic view on agrarian reform. Okay? So agriculture or the cultivation of land primarily affects, okay, the economic factor or the economy of the Philippines as a whole. Now, what about the sociocultural view? Well, the agrarian reform had resulted in favorable sociocultural changes, which includes the following: okay, self-subsistence mindset to one of surplus for selling, meaning to say that the farmers will start, okay, to do all what it takes to produce more in the land that they own. As I have said a while ago, if you own the land, then and you know that all the profits that you will gain from that land will be yours, then of course magsisipag ka kasi alam mong pag lumaki yung kita mo doon, mas malaki ang makukuha mo. Okay? So in that kind or in that time, okay, you are aftering not only for the return of your capital investment, but you are already aftering for the surplus, okay, of your capital investment. Meaning to say, kapag sarili mo yung lupa, magtsatsaga ka na mapalabas yung pinuhunan mo doon at hindi lang yung pinuhunan mo, kundi mag-gain ka ng profit which is considered already a surplus. Lampas pa doon sa capital investment mo at sa ine-expect mo na kita. Okay? Why? Because you know that the land that you are tilling is yours and you are no longer under the control of what we call the landlord or the landowner. Okay? Another sociocultural view of agrarian reform is that social order in the farmland started to improve significantly. Well, the farmers became more concerned about the need to keep peace and stability within the community so that they can continuously enjoy the growth of benefits on the farm. Social order, meaning to say, hindi na sila magtatamad-tamad at hindi na rin sila mag-i-instigate ng arguments or quarrels within the community, because they know that if they do so, their profit or their gain or agricultural work will be affected by the disorder that they may create. Okay, so they tried to improve their situation in terms of relationship towards co-farmers and towards the community. They also become active in practicing leadership roles. Why? You already own the land, so you must be the master to drive, or the master or the driver of the how you manage your particular farm. They began forming associations and stood in equal footing with their former in meetings and social gatherings. Okay? So nagiging active ngayon yung mga farmers na nagmamay-ari ng lupang kanilang sinasaka. Mas aktibo sila comparing doon sa mga farmers who are cultivating lands that they do not own. Okay? Like for example, there will be a seminar with respect to hybrid, the introduction of hybrid kind of seedlings, rice seedlings, and an introduction of a very powerful pesticides to protect the seedlings. So, in that seminar, you would be able to observe that the farmers who own the lands that they are tilling or cultivating participate more and attend more on that particular seminar than those farmers who do not own the land. Kasi ang mindset nila is, bakit ako pupunta? Hindi naman sa akin yung lupa na sinasaka ko. Okay? Malaki man o maliit yung kikitain ko dyan, mag-share pa rin naman kami ng amo ko. So those would be the mindset of those farmers who do not own the land, which is very different thing when you own the land that you are cultivating. Okay? Then you would be very excited to know all things that would protect and that would increase your profit or your gain from your own land. Okay? So land reform enhanced agricultural productivity and therefore increased net family income. This is one of the target of the agrarian reform, to uplift the life of the landless farmers from poverty. Okay? So that if these farmers will be given lands of their own, okay, to cultivate, then of course they would produce an income for the family, okay, that would be used to send their children to school, and that would widen their contacts or relationship outside of their own homes. Why? Because since they already have that money, okay, they will go on more trips, they will visit more often in markets and other places where gatherings can be, or social gatherings can be met. Okay? So agrarian reform promotes modern outlook, I should say, among farmers. This includes what we call prejudice and modern family planning programs, and they will start to recognize the economic alternatives in urban and industrial sectors. So that is the sociocultural view of the agrarian reform. Okay, so next time I would be discussing the two more views, or the religious view on the agrarian reform and the introduction to, or the comprehensive agrarian reform program of the government, and its history on how it emerges on the Philippines. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you had taken down notes during the discussion. Goodbye.